I welcome members of the American Club of Lisbon to this session, but also members of other American clubs in the Association of American Clubs, an association of American clubs from particularly around Europe, but we are growing it around the world. And I reserve a special welcome to ambassadors to Portugal from Australia, Canada, Italy, South Korea, Thailand, and the United Kingdom, who have signed up and indicated that they will join us for the session. So I welcome you all. The minister has agreed that to generously be in a form of a dialogue with me for about 50 minutes or so. I will ask him questions and listen to his answers, which he will share with all of us. And then we'll leave about 15 minutes or so for questions from you, from the audience, which I urge you to send to us on the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And we will try to include as many questions as we will try to pass on to the minister as many questions from the audience as we can. Augusto Santos Silva hardly needs an introduction. But I will nevertheless have the honor to say that he was born in Porto. He went to school there and university, graduated with a degree in history from the University of Porto, before continuing later on to a doctorate in sociology at USCT in Lisbon. He began his career as an economics professor in Porto. And his natural leadership talent and intelligence led him to be named Dean of the University of Porto in just 7 years. I find it difficult to believe how quickly you rose in that profession, but that showed your natural leadership talent already at a young age. You began your political career while in Porto. You joined the Socialist Party and you were elected to the National Assembly in 1995, more than 25 years ago. And you've served ever since in the National Assembly. Your exceptional career in education made you a natural choice to be named the Minister of Education in 2000 in the government of Antonio Guterres. And the minister has since occupied in various ministerial posts, including Minister of Parliamentary Affairs, Minister of Culture, Minister of Defense, before assuming your current post as Minister of Foreign Affairs in the first Costa government in 2015 and renewed in the current Costa government. You are highly respected among your European ministers of foreign affairs, and I've read a few times you are known for your astute negotiating skills. Added to your multiple accomplishments, you're also an author, having published 2 books. So we are extremely fortunate that you've accepted our invitation to give us a little more than an hour of your time today at this nearly halfway point in the 6 months Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. Mr. Minister, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. If I may start with a question I wanted to ask. Before we get into the content of the Portuguese presidency, I think many of us, myself included, we don't really understand how the EU functions. It's a bit opaque, it's so complicated. What does it mean for a country to be president of the Council of the European Union? How much power does the Portuguese government have during these 6 months? And how do they relate to the European Council has a president already, Charles Michel. What is the relationship between your presidency and him? The European Commission, of course, as the executive arm, also has a president, Ursula von der Leyen, and then there's the European Parliament. So can you explain to us a little bit better how the functioning of the presidency works in terms of the European structure?
Thank you very much for your question. And of course, I will seize this opportunity to try to explain clearly what is very complex, the functioning of the European Union. You know that we are 460 million people. divided into 27 member states with different histories, different languages, different traditions, including different geopolitical positions. We are not a federal state nor a confederation. I think of the existing methods or regimes of government, the closest to the kind of procedures we follow in the European Union is perhaps Swiss. Like the Swiss, we have to build up consensus in our government, in our executive branch. The different political families are represented, and so on. So, first of all, we have the European Parliament. The European Parliament is directly elected by all the European citizens according to the demographic proportionality. So the largest group is the German group of members of the European Parliament, and Portugal is represented by 21 members of the European Parliament. And the election is every 5 years, and people present themselves to the elections in a list methods, following the party structure of the European Union. So we have currently the first group is the conservative group. We call it the Popular European Group. Then come the Socialists, Social Democrats, and the Labour parties. Then comes the Liberals in the European sense of the word. Then the Greens, and so on. Then you have an executive branch who governs the everyday life of the European Union. It's what we call the Commission, the European Commission. The European Commission is formed, has to be approved by the European Parliament, and the European Commission traditional includes all the three major political groups in Europe. So, according to the results of the elections to the European Parliament, the European Commission is formed. So now it is chaired by a conservative, Ursula von der Leyen, and the Socialists and Social Democrats and the Liberals are also represented in the Commission. But that's I think, the closest we have in Europe to the American administration. That's the executive branch of the European Union, with a very important aspect. The only body in the European political architecture that has the right to present proposals, legislative proposals, is the European Commission. So whatever the matter, when you have to pass legislation, the only body that can present proposals for legislative processes is the European Commission. Then you have a sort of Senate, the equivalent to the American Senate. It means a body that represents equally, in an equal proportion, all the member states of the European Union. That's what we call the European Council. The European Council is formed by all the heads of state or government of the 27 member states. And they normally they have meetings every 3 months. Of course, during this crisis, the meetings happen very often, but normally they have meetings every 3 months, and they agree on the global, on the general political orientations. They define the strategic agenda of our union. And then somehow in the middle between the executive branch and this kind of Senate, the European Council, you have what we call the Council. The Council is the Council of Ministers of the European Union. So every month all the foreign ministers of Europe meet together in what we call the FAC, Foreign Affairs Council. All the ministers of defense meet together in the Defense Council. You have the Council of Ministers of Agriculture. You have the Council of the Ministers of the Economy. You have the Council of Ministers of Education, of Health, and so on. And this is what Portugal currently heads. The presidency of the Council is the country that every semester has the responsibility of chairing all the formations of the Council of Ministers of the 27 member states.
So as chair, you set the agenda for each of the meetings.
I set the agenda and I work closely with Commission. So the method, the normal method is the following one. For instance, yesterday, the Commission presented a proposal. They proposed to launch what we call immunization certificate, green pass, allowing people that have been vaccinated against COVID or have already been infected, so they are immunized, or have or presented negative tests to COVID, to freely circulate among all the member states. So the Commission presented the proposal to a European law. We call it regulation. Now, the Council, so myself, my colleague, the Minister of Health, has the responsibility to get the consensus among the health ministers or the interior ministers of the European Union in order to approve that proposal of the Commission. When this consensus is obtained, she must go, the chair must go to the European Parliament and get their approval. And if this, all this happens, you have the law approved.
Okay, very complex. Now, I understand that the country before Portugal, Germany, and the country after Slovenia are also in an informal structure of agreement, I guess, to provide more continuity. I'm assuming that. Now, does that mean that, let's say, when Germany decided on its agenda, the fact that Portugal was going to be next, does that mean that you have an input at that stage? Like when Portugal defines its agenda, does Slovenia have a right to say, but, you know, maybe you should change it in such and such a way? How does
Yes.
this relationship between the three countries work that follow
Yes.
each other in 3 6 months periods?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we function as a trio. So Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia agreed on a common program for this trio of presidencies. And the next trio will be France, Czech Republic, and Sweden, is already preparing together their program. So there is this sequence, this logic that is very important for the coherence of the agenda of the European Union.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. So that Portugal's agenda has already been shared and agreed to with Germany and Slovenia. Now, Portugal, the government of Portugal has summarized its priority during the 6 months with the phrase, quote, a fair, green, and digital recovery. Can you enlighten us what is meant by this phrase as a summary of Portugal's priority during its 6 months presidency? A fair,
Yes, indeed.
green, and digital recovery.
Indeed, and very briefly, I need only a few words to characterize what is our program. We took very important decisions last year. We decided to work together, launching a plan for the recovery of the European economy. A plan that has to be now put in practice by all the member states. So our first priority is to implement this plan, to implement the decisions that were taken last year. So that's why we say our first priority is to launch or to foster the recovery of Europe.
This plan is the 750 billion euro recovery plan.
Yes, it includes this exceptional program, and it includes also the regular multi-annual budget of the European Union.
Which happened to start at the same time as this plan. Is that?
Yes. So the idea was to get an artillery to combat the economic crisis and to mobilize. As a matter of fact, I think 1 trillion of euros in this launching of the economic recovery of Europe and the preservation of our internal markets. But this is not only a matter of recovering the economy. The idea is that you have to recover your economy investing in its transformation. In what sense? In the sense of energy transition, of climate action, of digital transformation of the manufacture, of the public administration, of the services, and so on. So that's why we say it's now time to deliver, to obtain results, to implement decisions in order to get a green and digital recovery of the economy. For instance, just a figure to make it clear. Each national plan for the recovery has to be approved by all the others. And each national plan for the economic recovery has to meet 2 important targets. At least 20% of the funds have to be allocated to investments that can boost digital transition, and at least 37% of the total amount of the funds have to be invested in climate or environmental or energy transition. That's why it's a recovery and at the same time a transformation. As we say, in order to make Europe more resilient and more autonomous.
Okay, but so
finally,
yeah,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Finally, we say that it is not enough to say that this recovery has to be digital and has to be green. It has also to be fair. What we do mean by this? You know the formula. We in Europe, we claim that the 2 basic characteristics of the European Union as such is on the political dimension. We are liberal democracies, liberal in the European sense of the term. So we are democracies, pluralistic democracies. And on the economy, we are a social market economy. So that's why we think that in order to leave no one behind in this transition, we have to enhance, reinforce our social model. So that's why we say for a fair, green and digital recovery.
Defending the European social model. Now, so that is what you are managing during these 6 months. And I mean, does that put, now, what is your role? When, I mean, you said that each of the 27 governments has to present a national plan consistent with the objectives of the overall of the EU. Are they negotiating with you in these national plans? Is that the process? Can you share that a little bit with us? If I happen to be, you know, from Denmark and I want to do something and it does not completely fit, are you going to tell me what I can and cannot do?
In a sense, yes, but not exactly this way. Because, let's see imagine your example, the Danish. The Danish present their draft, their plan of expenditures and investments and reforms to the recovery and transformation of their economy. Okay, that's their responsibility. Their government has to present a plan. Sometimes the national parliament has to approve that plan, but this is at the national level. For instance, in Portugal, we discussed with the parliament, and then it is the government that is responsible for the final draft of the plan. So you present the plan to the executive branch, to the European Commission, and you discuss technically with the officials of the European Commission. You say, I want to make this road and that road, and the European Commission can say, no, because it is not making roads, it's not a priority. You have to make, for instance, facilities for wind energy, for instance.
Exactly.
So you discuss technically with the Commission. And when you present the plan, the Commission has to do an assessment. It's right, it is wrong, what does the Commission think? And the plan and the assessment of the Commission are presented to the Council that is chaired by Portugal. The Council is the 27 ministers, in this case, the finance ministers, that have to approve by qualified majority your plan. So your responsibility as president of the Council is to make it clear that every plan that is presented was already evaluated by the Commission, and ensure that your colleagues proceed in order that the plan can be timely approved.
And that's a very important role that the Portuguese government has during that time of a lot of compromising and finding solutions. Okay, let's move to something that is in the newspapers every day today, the European vaccination project. Europe has been severely criticized by many when it's compared to the United Kingdom or the US in terms of its ability and success in getting the European population vaccinated. And of course, in the recent days, we've seen certain countries, so we've seen that Europe has acted as a whole in terms of its project for vaccination. And then we've seen recently some countries acting not as the European Union, but individually, for example, in temporarily ceasing to administer the AstraZeneca vaccine. So you're sitting in the driver's seat during this crisis, basically, around a very important issue. Can you share with us your thoughts on this major subject that's of interest to all of us and each of us? You know, everyone listening wants to know whether they're going to be able to get vaccinated, how soon, with AstraZeneca, without, etc. So,
yes, of course. Our commitment is to get 70% of our adult population vaccinated by the end of summer. That's our target.
You think that's still possible?
Yes, I think that is still possible, because the experts tell us that you get the so-called herd immunity of group, if you get 70% of your adult population vaccinated. So that's how we work. And we took a very important decision to make only one common procurement purchase of vaccines. That was our executive branch, so the Commission, on behalf of all of us, made contracts with 8 different companies in order to get what I think will represent 1 billion of vaccines available to vaccinate all Europeans, and also to donate many vaccines to third countries. And we decided to do this together. So it is an European procurement. And then the vaccines that were purchased are allocated to each member state according to its population. So we did avoid any kind of competition among ourselves. Portugal does not compete with Germany or with France or with Greece in purchasing vaccines. Okay? So the problem was that the capacity of production of the amount of vaccines that were purchased seemed and seems very low. The companies, one company is not capable until now of realizing, producing all the vaccines that were already purchased by the European Commission. This company is AstraZeneca, and this is a problem. So we have an issue of shortage of the supply. Fortunately, with Pfizer, we had at the beginning of this process the same kind of difficulty, but this difficulty was overcome. So Pfizer is now abiding by all its contractual commitments. The same goes for Moderna, but with respect to AstraZeneca, there is this problem of shortage. There is another unexpected difficulty because some countries reported some incidents concerning the already vaccinated people, and we had to suspend for some days, I hope, the administration of the application of the vaccines, waiting for our common agency for medicines to pronounce on the validity, on the quality of the AstraZeneca vaccine. So that's why we are behind the United States and behind, significantly behind the United Kingdom in what regards the pace of the vaccination. Israel is a rather different, a rather singular case because, you know, they have a lot of experience in terms of logistics due to their military expertise, and they decided to share personal data with the companies, so they have a different approach. The same goes for Chile, for example. Chile is vaccinating very rapidly because they followed a different method. But now we are significantly behind the United States and the United Kingdom in the vaccination process. Of course, this is a very huge process. You are dealing with the vaccination of 460 people, 460 million people. And of course, this is a new challenge. But I do think that we are going to get things right during the next months. So I hope that this targets, having 2/3 of our adult population vaccinated before fall, will be met.
We can only hope that your optimism is justified.
You cannot be a politician if you don't believe in your capacity of doing things.
Okay, let me change subjects completely and talk about post-Brexit. Portugal, of course, perhaps more than any other country in Europe, was very unhappy to see the United Kingdom leave the European Union. And yet, coincidentally, it is during Portugal's presidency that the first phase of putting into place a new relationship has started. We read some articles about difficulties. Obviously, the negotiations were rushed, leading to the end, did not, let's say, take the time to work out all of the details of what would happen afterwards. which obviously has led to some problems. Can you share your assessment of the current situation in terms of the relationship with the United Kingdom and how you see that developing in the months and years to come?
Thank you. You are absolutely right. Portugal was among the member states that felt as rather difficult, unhappy outcome the Brexit. You know that we historically we have a very closest ties with Britain. As a matter of fact, historically, our survival as an independent state in the peninsula depended a lot of our capacity of counterbalancing the continental influence of Europe with the influence of Britain and of the Anglo-Saxons. And this still is quite pertinent. You can see it. And the ties between British and Portuguese are very, very close. That said, we understood and we accepted the decision of the British people, and we were among the ones that most actively worked for a withdrawal agreement, so an orderly Brexit, and then a new cooperation and trade agreement, the one that we have now in the table. This is a very interesting process, and it is really interesting if you compare it with the family affairs, because there was a divorce. The British wanted to divorce from Europe. That's a decision we have to respect, but this is always, I suppose, a painful event. There's a lot of things to discuss, a lot of common assets to share, some problems that arose again, and so on. But this is a very specific divorce, because we always said, Europeans and the British, that we were preparing a divorce to start a new relationship. It's quite difficult. So it is not completely a divorce. And you have to keep it all in mind, always in mind, that this is not really completely a divorce. Why? Because first of all, we will have economic relation that will be very easy. We want it to be very easy. We have already a trade agreement, and we, as presidency of the Council, we are working to obtain the approval of our European Parliament. So you want to preserve the economic relations between European Union and the United Kingdom as close, as strong as they were. Secondly, and in my view, most important, it is our alignment, full alignment in what is our normative view, what are our institutions, what are our values. The United Kingdom and the European Union share the same geopolitical situation and the same view on democracy, human rights, rule of law, humanist values, and this is very important. Then, third, we have to align as much as possible our external policies, our foreign policies, in the United Nations, in the World Trade Organization, in the World Health Organization, in several multilateral platforms. Europe and the United Kingdom share the same approaches and work together, and have to work together. Fourth, and for me the most important, you have the security and defense pillar. You have this geostrategic situation. And in this regard, the United Kingdom does not belong anymore to the European Union, but United Kingdom belongs to Europe. So whenever, as a Portuguese minister, I think of the transatlantic ties, I think of a square. You have European Union, of course, but you have also United Kingdom, you have also Canada, and you have also United States. And nothing functions but in this square, in this kind of connection, but connection, a very fundamental, very structural proximity in a very fundamental issue, the issue of security and defense. That's why we think that if there was this divorce within the European Union and the United Kingdom left us, that's a reason to reinvest, to reinforce our connection with the United Kingdom in NATO and in other common platforms.
So yeah, you have this very positive view of the future relationship of the United Kingdom with the European Union. Is that frankly shared by all the 26 other countries in the European Union that view it in such a positive light?
No, that's why it is so important, the behavior and the participation and the contribution of countries like Portugal. It is not only Portugal. If you think of other Atlantic countries of Europe, like Denmark, Ireland, the Netherlands, Portugal within the European Union, or Norway outside the European Union, you notice that it is very important for a significant part of Europe to keep this Atlantic projection. And we need to counterbalance with it the continental push, the forces that push the continental nature of Europe. Europe is the two things at the same time: a continent and the continent projected to an ocean. So I would say that if you speak with other European foreign ministers, you perhaps won't see the enthusiasm that you see in my words, but I do think that Europe really needs this enthusiasm. Europe is not Europe without United Kingdom, and Europe is not Europe if not integrated in what we call the political West or the North Atlantic community.
Okay. And in that sense, what looked to me as an irony of Portugal's presidency during this first phase, your words indicate that maybe it is very fortunate that Portugal is here to set the tone, as you are doing, of a very close relationship with the United Kingdom during this phase. And so your presidency just at this time perhaps is particularly important in terms of that relationship.
Yes, but I think we need some time, because as in any other divorce, now the two parties are in a certain way still struggling or blaming each other, but it is normal. You need time to see that the relationship is important. You can put things on your back and move away. So if you see the news in the newspapers and the TV, of course, this is a time for mutual blaming. We are indeed in some judicial processes or procedures, but I think we have to see this in a midterm view. So the responsibility of the Portuguese presidency is first to monitor the implementation of the withdrawal agreement. That's our responsibility. Secondly, to move in order that European Parliament approves the new agreement, the CTA, the TCA, Trade and Cooperation Agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And thirdly, to de-escalate things, to calm down. Because, well, the divorce is a complicated process, but still we can be friends and we have common interests. We have common interests to take care of. That's our responsibility of presidency.
Again, a very nice, positive look on things. So we, again, sorry if you, I'm changing the subject, but there's so many things that I would love to hear your opinion on. Portugal has announced the social summit on May 7th, 8th in Porto as the central event of the Portuguese presidency. There hasn't been a lot of talk about it in the press and others. Can you inform our audience, what it is? Is it going to be, by the way, is it going to be physical in person, or will it continue to be just a digital? Have you decided, has a decision been made whether people will actually come? So, and who is invited and what is its objective? Share with us a little bit more to...
Yeah, first on the logistics of the event. We are planning it as a presential event. So the speakers, the main participants, the representatives of the European institutions and member states and the social partners will be physically present. We'll be physically in Porto next 7th and 8th May. But you know that we are learning a lot from the pandemic and from our adaptation to the pandemic. And one thing that we have already learned is that you can multiply the attendance of a meeting using a hybrid form. So you have people in the room and you can have thousands and thousands of people following the meeting by internet. So we will organize that way. There will be a small number of participants physically attending the meeting and a large number of people attending the meeting by digital means. I think this is one good thing that we learned with the pandemic. We learned two good things. This one, and the other thing is that many physical meetings and trips you usually did can be replaced by internet, and you don't have to spend that time in trips, and you can spare the emissions that you produce and so on. So this on the logistics. On the method, on the content, our aim is very easy to describe. We have a plan. In Europe, we always have plans, but we have a plan to facilitate, in a certain way, to tame the power of the digital transition and to implement the energy and climate action, the energy transition. We think that we can do it, and we can do it if we ameliorate, if we improve the European potential in terms of skills, in terms of innovation. If we can see this economic transformation as an opportunity to create jobs and to improve labor standards, and if you ensure that people have what we call a safety net model of welfare, some services, model of social protection that form a safety net for them. The social summit focus on these points, on skills, on the new wave of employments you can create with the climate action, with the digital transition, with the reindustrialization of Europe, and the safety net you need to include everyone. And why are we doing the social summit?
Fair in your initial statement.
Because just to finish, because it is very important for us that the politicians, so the representatives, the leaders and the representatives of the parliament and governments can work together with social partners. So it is a social summit because it is a summit in which participate the European social partners, employees, employers, and NGOs.
Okay, it reminds me, of course, of the word fair in your initial statement of the fundamental objectives. And I guess the other word that is included in what you're saying is combating inequality at all levels, including gender inequality. I assume is very much a part of the social summit agenda. So we will be interested to hear of the results of that.
May I interrupt you just to add an element, because sometimes, and I think for an American mindset, Europeans can seem too rhetoric. But in this case, we have defined very specific targets. We say that by 2030, we want that almost 80% of the adult European population be employed. So we have a target, 78% of the European adults must be employed, have an employment. Secondly, we want that at least 60% of the employees in Europe get some kind of vocational training each year. And finally, we want to reduce the level of poverty, the mass of poverty in Europe by 15 million of people until 2030. So we are working in very specific targets in order to mobilize people, institutions, social partners, economic agents to fulfill this target.
Very ambitious targets. Interesting. I have two levels of questions, but I think I will combine them, Mr. Minister, because you have such a global view of things. I'm sure you will. I wanted to throw out the phrase strategic autonomy on the one hand, and then also talk about it. And I know many of our listeners are particularly interested in the relationship with the new Biden administration. We are not yet the 20th of March, so not quite yet 2 months since the inauguration of President Biden on January 20. It's incredible how little time that is, and yet how much has happened in those 2 months. And of course, the Biden administration President Biden has announced very clearly his idea to renew, reset, and render more active and positive the transatlantic relationship after the difficulties from the previous administration. Let me come back to strategic autonomy. It's an interesting term because in Europe, we use it in a certain way. In the US, strategic autonomy is pretty focused on being less dependent on China. That's part of the US now, somewhat, in my view, excessive focus on China, but that is the reality of the US political scene today. Strategic autonomy means controlling, and the period of the pandemic showed how dependent
the US and Europe are on supply chains that they do not control. You know, we remember not having enough masks, not having enough protective gear, and no way to produce them in time, etc. So that led to reinforcing this idea of strategic autonomy, of not being dependent on any, particularly any rival but anyone, of being able to control your own critical production chains is part of it. The second part, and this is the European issue, after 4 years of the previous administration, can Europe count on the US the way it had in the past? And should it be able to take on let's say, a greater degree of autonomy than was the case beforehand? And that's obviously a critical question, which is related also, and excuse me for taking too much, it's much better to hear you than to hear me, but there clearly is a concern in Europe as to the possibility that the US might once again have an administration that would no longer be as faithful to its allies as we are used to in the past. And the fact that it happened once means it could happen again. And of course, theoretically, it could happen again. And so, you know, we're in the midst of this transition phase. So if you can share with us, I mean, many questions here. What has the US shown clearly in terms of its vision for a new transatlantic relationship? And give us your insight into these multiple issues, if you would, please, Mr. Minister.
Thank you very much. And if you allow me, I will start with a brief personal explanation. You have already mentioned that I am a professor at the Faculty of Economics. I'm a sociologist, so I teach sociology, a course of sociology for students of economics and management. And I always remind my students when I give classes of the first motto of Macintosh. That was, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. It's a very, very American and profound motto, and very different from the European mindset. And I always invited my students to think like Macintosh, put things simple in order to obtain the maximum sophistication. Don't complicate things, because if you complicate things, you cannot communicate. Well, unfortunately, the European tradition is not that European of simplicity. We cultivate the ambiguity. We belong to Baroque cultures like Portugal, like the Portuguese or French or German culture. So we do love complexity. But in politics, you have to be simple. And in geostrategy, you have to be very, very simple with no ambiguity. It is rare that you find a Portuguese politician that speaks of strategic autonomy. Well, this is right now an European formula. We have to use it, but we have to use it without any kind of ambiguity. So, what does this mean in terms of economy? It means that we Europeans, we want to be less dependent on value chains that we don't control. And specifically, we wish to be less dependent on value chains that are controlled by institutional frameworks that are antagonist to our institutional framework. So we want to be less dependent on China. Okay? We share this concern and this goal with the Americans. We are not as protectionist as you usually are. We don't use formulas buy European or Europe first. But we share the concerns that some of the goods, some of the goods we consider critical, we have to have the capacity of producing them or controlling their production and distribution chains. That is, in fact, one of the most important lessons of the pandemic. You know, in the first stages of the pandemic, we were competing among us to buy masks, to buy ventilators, and we were dependent on regions that are not, on markets that are not geographical, they are not only geographically far away of us, but more importantly, they are institutionally very far of us. First point. Second point, never speak of strategic autonomy of Europe when you deal with defense and security matters, because it can produce in your interlocutor, and if he or she is an American, it will produce the idea that you are trying to claim your independency towards him or her, or that's not the case. We want to reinforce what we call the European defense as a pillar of our common alliance with the Americans and the Canadians, NATO. It is very, very important that whenever we speak of strategic autonomy, we say that, yes, we have to fulfill more responsibilities in terms of security and defense, because we need a stronger Europe within the NATO. We need a stronger Europe in order that NATO can be stronger itself. Finally, the idea of strategic autonomy could mean a certain sense of closeness, Europe closing its borders or its commerce, and this would be a very wrong idea. That's why we use in Europe currently what in logical terms is an oxymoron, something composed of words that mean different and contradictory things. We are speaking now of open strategic autonomy of Europe. What does this mean? This means a stronger Europe, but still open to the world, because we have close relations with the United States, of course. We have close relations with Latin America. Our neighboring continent is Africa. We depend on Africa, and Africa depends on Europe. So we have to be open to the world. That's where President Biden arrives. I must say, I think I already said it in the American Club, that bilaterally, our relations with the Trump administration was very good. I have I must say this, it was a normal and productive relations. Ambassador Glass was a very good friend of Portugal, and we always found open doors in Washington, DC. That said, in terms of Europe, in European terms, the Trump administration was a kind of brackets. There was a bracketing of the Euro-American relationship. Why? Because, you know, President Trump did not rely that much on NATO. President Trump would not accept any kind of multilateralist approach. President Trump didn't believe in the Paris Agreement. So many of the most important issues for Europe, in those issues, the Americans were not allies. And in terms of trade, in which there are some divergent if not contradictory, interests between Europeans and Americans. You have Boeing, we have Airbus. It's natural that we clash. We were treated as enemies or adversaries more than as friends. Biden means exactly the opposite. Biden means the return of the president. Biden means the return of the United States to the Paris Agreement, return to multilateralism, the clear definition of Europeans as the closest allies, and the attitude, the eagerness to find a common ground to treat difficult issues, for instance, in terms of economy and trade. So I do think that this is a momentum, this is an opportunity that we have to seize. We cannot lose it, because the kind of alignment between Europe and states is more obvious than I think than ever. And just to finish my argument, we need this alignment. And we don't need this alignment in the North Atlantic. It's obvious that it exists. We need this alignment in when we face Asia Pacific, when you face Indo-Pacific. I always say this very, very simple thing, and this is a fact. Last November, 15 countries of the Asia Pacific region signed one of the most one of the largest economic or trade agreements in the world, what we call the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. What are these countries? The 7 countries of the ASEAN, of the Southeast of Asia, all very close either to Europe or to the United States. Japan and Korea, that are perhaps the most important allies of the United States and of Europe in the East Asia. Australia and New Zealand, that are, we could say, sons or grandsons of the Europeans, and China. Can you ignore this? Can you as a European, can you as American ignore this? I don't think you can. So you have to work together. You have to work together in defining and implementing your approach to this region. And you know, this region is the region in which the economic growth is more intense. So it's vital.
And you think that, I know your answer, but I want to hear it anyway. You think that we can work actively with the United States and not find ourselves a junior partner in this excessive concern that the US has and focus on China and seeing the world as a new kind of competition between the US and China, and Europe and the rest of the world becomes somewhat secondary to the US agenda?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it is one of my favorite formulas. Europe cannot be the junior partner of the United States, and sometimes I am criticized because of that formula. So, but it's very easy to explain it. Let's make a comparison. Whenever the Trump administration told the Europeans, you have to choose, either you are with us and you are against China, or you are with China and then you are against us. That's a definition of your ally as a junior partner. The only thing you have to do, the only choice you are entitled to do is the choice. Either you follow us or you don't follow us. President Biden is saying, and Secretary Blinken is telling us a very different thing. He's telling us, let's build together a common approach to Russia. Let's build together a common approach to India. Let's build together a common approach to Africa, and so on. And this is a very important difference. So President Biden is telling the Europeans, we don't consider you as a junior partner. We consider you as partners, as equals, as the allies we need to build together an approach to the world order.
Thank you so much. Now, let me look. I've got a number of questions from the audience. One quick, I'll throw these quickly. If you want to work closely with China as well, what should be Portugal's position and the EU position in regard to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which I know you personally have felt that Portugal should not join, even though, 15, 17 EU countries have, I think in principle, entered into discussion with China to enter into an agreement on Belt and Road Initiative. What should be Portugal's position on that?
Well, as a matter of fact, we try to be somehow pioneer. We signed in 3 years ago a memorandum of understanding with China, in order that the two strategies, what we call the European strategy for Euro-Asia connectivity and the Belt and Road Initiative could cooperate. But I would say that the recent events, the course of history has proved that we need to stop and to suspend any kind of cooperation, because we do think that the Chinese have to intensively review their own strategy, because the kind of depth diplomacy that they are doing, the kind of environment impact of the infrastructures they are promoting are not acceptable. So we need a break, and we need to rethink our relations with China in really not only geoeconomic terms, but also in geopolitical terms.
So in view of this evolution, is there any change in the Costa government's attitude towards foreign investment in Portugal? Are we more or less open to Chinese direct investment in Portugal than before the change in the US administration?
Well, we are very proud of the fact that our foreign investors are, by this order, first Germans, then French, then Spanish, then British, then Americans, then Belgians, then Italians, and so on. And we feel very comfortable with this. We have also Chinese investment in critical sectors of the Portuguese economy, namely in energy and also in banking. Our attitude is this one: if they abide by our laws and European laws, they are welcomed. But really, we need, and we focus our policy in terms of getting more foreign investments in the countries that are institutionally closer to us.
Okay. Could you discuss the threat represented by Russia under Putin's control, especially with the Russian natural gas supply to Western Europe? These are all questions from our audience.
Yeah. I could be accused of a certain conflict of interests since Portugal advocates the diversification of the sources of energy supply to Europe. You know that Portugal is a very important entrance door of the LNG that comes from the United States to Europe. Our Sines port is the deepest, the largest ports of deep waters in Europe, and the closest to the American coast. So I could be accused of being defending Portuguese interests when I say that Europe must be less dependent on Russia in what regards energy supply. And again, this is not only an energy issue, this is a security issue. So I would say that one of the most important projects we have to finish in Europe is what we call the energy interconnections. So the kind of pipelines and gas lines and electrical connections that allow the energy that is produced in the Iberian Peninsula to go to Central and Eastern Europe, because we have to diversify our sources of energy.
Okay, maybe one last question. I see the time is advancing. Thank you so much for staying with us. Yeah, this is an indirect, interesting question. Portugal has been more successful than most European countries in integrating minorities. Portugal has had a remarkable success in integrating a large influx of people from outside of Portugal some years ago. It's a basic European problem, and there are minorities and Muslim minorities in many countries that Europe has not been, let's say that anyway, there are risks of the difficulty of integrating. Do we have a lesson to share with Europe, and can Portugal play a role in helping Europe in overcoming what is clearly going to be a huge problem and going to become much more difficult, particularly as some of these minorities grow in terms of their weight in the population of countries, France, Germany, Italy. We can go through this. Sorry, it's a complex question we can end, but I'd love to hear your view on the subject.
I would claim that Portugal can be a very good case study. But I must confess that it's a very singular situation. First of all, we are a country of immigrants, people that lived the country, that left the country historically and leave the country. You perhaps know that we have recorded, registered in our consular registers, we have Portuguese citizens living in almost all the countries of the world. It's more than 180 countries. The member states of the United Nations are 193. The countries in which we have recorded the presence of Portuguese citizens. So we are used historically to contact with different cultures, with different civilizations. We were the first Europeans arriving by sea, not only to India, but also to China or Japan, okay? And Brazil, and of course, many other places in the world. First characteristics. Second characteristic, we are also a country of immigrants, people, foreigners living here. I would say that by now 6 or 7% of our population are foreigners, but the vast majority of these immigrants are Portuguese-speaking people. And of course, this is very easy for the integration. You speak the same language, you love codfish, you have the same habits, so it's a very comfortable situation compared with countries in which this kinship does not exist. Third, we have a very good tradition in Portugal of religious pluralism. You know that we are a Catholic country, so the presence of the Catholic Church in Portugal is pervasive, and it's one of the fundamentals of the Portuguese culture. But still, we have religious minorities, and we leave the state of play in terms of religious pluralism is perfect. I always give this example that for me it's very symbolic and it's very easy to understand. Our current president, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, the president of the Portuguese Republic, is now in his second term, and in the first inauguration and now in the second inauguration, the inauguration of Portuguese president takes place in the parliament. So there is a ceremony in the parliament, and this is the place for the inauguration speech of the president. And then immediately the second public event of President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa was a ceremony, a religious ceremony with all the religious communities that exist in Portugal. He did it 5 years ago. He did it again last week or something. And this is very symbolic of what we consider. And he always say, I'm the Portuguese of all I'm the president of all the Portuguese, whatever the religion, whatever the ideology, whatever the age, but yet I'm always the president of all the foreigners that live in Portugal. I think it's a good example.
So I wish we could continue, Mr. Minister. It's been wonderful hearing you. We could continue for hours. There are many subjects we didn't broach, but thank you so much for sharing this time with us. I certainly appreciate it enormously. And may I take a rendezvous with you after the end of the presidency, that we measure the success that you and your colleagues will have had in helping move the European Union forward on this absolutely ambitious and wonderful agenda that you have described to us. So thank you.
That's a deal.
So much.
That's a deal. Okay, perfectly. And thank you very much for this invitation and all the success for the American Club.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister.
Okay. See you. See you.